कुंज बिहारी गोपीजन वल्लभ गिरिवरधारी गोपीजन वल्लभ गिरिवरधारी राधा माधव कुंज बिहारी जय राधा माधव कुंज बिहारी यशोदानंदन ब्रज जन रंजन यशोदानंदन ब्रज जन रंजन यशोदानंदन ब्रज जन रंजन यशोदानंदन ब्रज जन रंजन यमुना तीर वनचारी यमुना तीर वनचारी यमुना तीर वनचारी यमुना तीर वनचारी जय राधा माधव कुंज बिहारी 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 जय जय राधा माधव कुंज बिहारी जय ओम विष्णुपद परमहंस परमशिकाचार्य अष्टोत्तरशत श्री श्रीमद शील अभय चरणानंद भक्ति वेदांत साई महाराज शील प्रभुपाद की जय अनंत कोटि वैष्णव वृंद की जय नाम आचार्य श्री ठाकुर हरिदास की जय प्रेम से कहो श्री कृष्ण चैतन्य प्रभु नित्यानंद श्री अद्वैत गदाधर शिवासादि गौड़ भक्त वृंद की जय श्री श्री राधा कृष्ण गोप गोपीनाथ श्याम कुंद राधा कुंद गिरि गोवर्धन की जय वृंदावन धाम की जय नवद्वीप मायापुर धाम की जय गंगा देवी की जय यमुना मई की जय भक्ति देवी की जय तुलसी रानी की जय समवेत भक्त वृंद की जय श्री हरिनाम संकीर्तन की जय। ग्रंथराज श्रीमद् भागवतम की जय। इस्कॉन बीबीटी संस्थापक आचार्य श्रील प्रभुपाद की जय। गौर प्रेमानंदे। All glories to the Srimad devotees. All glories to the Srimad devotees. All glories to the Srimad devotees. All glories to Sri Sri Guru and Gauranga. Jai Shri Prabhupada. Om Ajnanatimirandhasya Jnananjanashalakaya Chakshurunmilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. Shri Chaitanya Manobhishtam Sthapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Kada Mahyam Dadati Swapadantikam Vandeham Shri Guru Shri Yuta Parakamalam Shri Gurun Vaishnavamscha Shri Rupam Sagrajatam Sahagana Raghunathan Vitam Tam Sajivam Sadvaitam Savadhutam Parijana Sahitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Padan Sahagana Lalita Shri Vishakhanvitamscha. He Krishna Karuna Sindho Dinabandho Jagatpate Gopesha Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namostute Tapta Kanchana Gaurangi Radhe Vrindavaneshwari Vrishabhanu Sute Devi Pranamami Haripriye Vansha Kalpatarubhyascha Kripa Sindhubhya Evacha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha. Jaya Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Srivasadi Gaur Bhakta Vrinda. Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. Madgavirapi Gopala Swikuryat Kripaya Yadi Tadaiva Sampayah Pitva Hrishayustat Priyajanaha. The third chapter is entitled Karma Yoga, and we're on text number 27. Did you just hear the same text in Hindi? Okay, that's different. All right, so this is, anyway, one of the more often quoted, very famous verses, important verses from Bhagavad Gita. Those who don't know the verse yet, it's a good idea to memorize this verse. It will help you a lot. Prakritehe kriyamanani gunai karmani sarvashah ahankara vimurhatma kartaham iti manyate. Prakritehe kriyamanani gunai karmani sarvashah ahankara vimurhatma kartaham iti manyate. Prakritehi kriyamanani gunaihi karmani sarvashah ahankara vimurhatma kartaham iti manyate. Prakrite kriyamanani manani gunaihi karmani sarvashah Ahankara vimudhatma kartaham iti manyate. Prakritehi kriyamanani gunaihi karmani sarvashaha. Ahankara vimudhatma kartaham iti manyate. Ladies. Prakrite kriyamanani gunaihi karmani sarvashaha. Ahankara vimudhatma kartaham iti manyate. Prakrite kriyamanani gunaihi karmani sarvashaha. Ahankara vimudhatma kartaham iti manyate. Prakrite, of material nature. Kriyamanani, being done. Gunaihi, by the modes. Karmani, activities. Sarvashaha, all kinds of. Ahankara vimudha, bewildered by false ego. Atma, the spirit soul. Karta, doer. Aham, I. Iti, thus. Manyate, thinks. He thinks. Translation. The spirit soul, bewildered by the influence of false ego, thinks himself the doer of activities that are in actuality carried out by the three modes of material nature. Please repeat. The spirit soul, bewildered by the influence of false ego, thinks himself the doer of activities that are in actuality carried out by the three modes of material nature. Purport by His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada, founder and Acharya of the International Society for Krishna Consciousness. Two persons, one in Krishna consciousness and the other in material consciousness, working on the same level, may appear to be working on the same platform, but there is a wide gulf of difference in their respective positions. The person in material consciousness is convinced by false ego that he is the doer of everything. He does not know that the mechanism of the body is produced by material nature, which works under the supervision of the Supreme Lord. The materialistic person has no knowledge that ultimately he is under the control of Krishna. The person in false ego takes all credit for doing everything independently, and that is the symptom of his nescience. He does not know that this gross and subtle body is the creation of material nature under the order of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, and as such, his bodily and mental activities should be engaged in the service of Krishna, in Krishna consciousness. The ignorant man forgets that the Supreme Personality of Godhead is known as Hrishikesha, or the master of the senses of the material body. For due to his long misuse of the senses in sense gratification, he is factually bewildered by the false ego, which makes him forget his eternal relationship with Krishna. Srila Ramanujacharya has commented on this verse. Prakritehi gunaihi satvadibihi swanurupam kriyamanani karmani pratyahankara vimudhatma aham karteti manyate. Ahankarena vimudha atma yasyasau ahankara vimudhatma. Ahankaro nama anaham arthe prakritao aham iti abhimanaha. Tena agnatatma sarupo gunakarma swaham karteti manyate iti arthaha. Regarding actions performed by the modes of nature themselves, that's sattva guna, rajaguna, tamoguna, etc. The spirit self, atma, bewildered through false ego, thinks, I am the doer. The ahankara vimudhatma is he whose self is bewildered through false ego. In material nature, the conceit of I, in reference to what isn't I, is called false ego. This means that the unknown actual self, ajnata atma sarupa, thereby thinks, I am the doer of actions that are carried out by the modes, the gunas. Madhvacharya has also given his comments. Vidvad avidusho karma bhedam aha prakriteritihi. This verse distinguishes the actions of the wise from the actions of those who are not wise. Prakriter gunair indriyadibhihi. When we speak of prakriti here, that means by the modes, which also by extension means by the senses, the body, the mind, and so on. Prakritam apekshya guna bhutani hitani tat sambandhini tacha. These are the subsidiaries of that prakriti. They're simply its effects. Nahit pratibimbasya kriya. The functioning of nature doesn't belong to the reflection. This requires some explanation. What is that reflection? The word is used pratibimba. In Madhvacharya's philosophy, the jiva is considered to be a reflection of the Supreme Lord. He's not considered to be part and parcel of the Supreme Lord. He's considered to be a reflection. In other words, he makes an absolute distinction. You're not, in his view, one with God in any sense. You're a reflection. And just as a reflection in a mirror, well, put it this way. If you look in the mirror and the reflection is doing something other than what you are doing, there's a problem. So, this is his point. That we actually cannot do anything without being prompted by the Supreme Lord. And that's a problem philosophically, actually. Because, in effect, it takes away the minute independence of the jiva. We say that the jiva has minute independence. Madhvacharya says the jiva has no independence. And that makes Krishna responsible for whatever the jivas do. Is that a fact? Well, we'll see. He's teaching that the jivatma is just a reflection or pratibimba of the Lord, and thus the jiva cannot act independently of the Lord. Therefore, the jiva's assumed actions are actually carried out by the modes that function under the Lord's superintendence. So the Lord himself is not directly impelling us to do sinful things, for example, or pious things for that matter. But we are prompted by the modes of material nature, which are in fact working under his direction. So it's indirect. So that's Madhva's input on this verse. Sridhar Swami has also commented. He qualifies, prakritehi gunaihi, here these words are used, means by the functions of nature via the senses or by the modes of nature headed by sattva guna. You can interpret it either way. Sarvasha means sarva prakarina, by all means. Kriyamanani karmani ahankara vimudhatma means the self or the atma whose intelligence is bewildered by false ego when performing actions. In other words, the person identifying with the senses and other things that are not himself, actually. So this person thinks, aham karta, I'm the karta, I'm the doer. That's his idea. So he gives some comments further. He says, Nanu vidushapi chet karma kartavyam tarhi avidvad avidusho ko vishesha ityashanko bhayor vishesham darshayati prakriteriti dvabhyam. Someone might ask the question that if the wise perform actions and the fools also perform actions, then what's the distinction? They're both doing the same thing. Anticipating this doubt, Bhagavan shows Arjuna that there is a distinction. And he does this with these two verses, beginning with this one. I don't want to get ahead of the game, so I'm not going to recite text number 28, but the two verses are taken as a pair by Sridhar Swami. And he goes on to say, Prakritir gunaihi prakriti karyair indriyaihi sarva prakarina kriyamanani yani karmani tani ahameva karta karomi iti manyate. The person in false ego is thinking that I'm the doer performing whatever activities are being done here. In every respect, these actions are carried out by the modes of nature through their effects, the senses. We've already heard this. And then he says, Tatra hetu ahankareti. What is the cause of all this? False ego, misidentity. Ahankarena indriyadishu atma dhyasena vimudha buddhi san. The intelligence is bewildered by the false ego superimposing the self onto other things. Our conception of ourself is superimposed upon our body, upon our senses, upon our mind, upon the whatever it is that we're identified with. This is the process of bewilderment that Krishna is talking about. This is what turns us into vimudhas. How does Srila Prabhupada translate this word vimudha? Anybody recall? Who's listening to Prabhupada every day? Raise your hand if you're hearing from Srila Prabhupada every day. Yes? Nobody's raising their hands. Okay, one person is hearing from Srila Prabhupada every day. That's not good. Then we become bewildered. The only reason we're not bewildered is because we've heard something from Srila Prabhupada. But Srila Prabhupada says vimudha means vishesha mudha. Mudha means ass, donkey, pants, like that. This is mudha. And vimudha means vishesh mudha, deluxe ass, especially an ass. Big ass, you can say. So these are strong words that are coming from the Supreme Personality of Godhead. And he's talking about us, because we all thinking that we're independent in this world due to our false ego. What is that false ego? We're identified with something that we're not. And we're being pushed and pulled by the senses, and we're being forced to do things good and bad that we'll hear about. And it's causing us to suffer. He's not suffering anything. We suffer. Therefore, ass. An ass. He's carrying a huge burden, and he doesn't stop to think that just to get a little grass at the end of the day, he's carrying a huge burden for the Toby. At least they used to use asses. Now they use motorcycles, but he's not thinking that he doesn't really require to do this because he's got a false ego, just like us. All right, so this last point here made by Sridhar Swami, it kind of hints at the last thing that Srila Prabhupada said in the final sentence of his purport, so I'm going to revisit that quickly. Srila Prabhupada said, due to his long misuse of the senses in sense gratification, he's factually bewildered by the false ego, which makes him forget his eternal relationship with Krishna. Habit. We're creatures of habit. It's said that if you do the same thing every day for a month, it becomes a habit. And you don't really have to even think about it. It becomes automatic. We become conditioned like that. Therefore, if you come to Mangalarati every day for a month, then you become habituated. If you chant Hare Krishna every day for a month, if you read Prabhupada's books every day for a month, you become habituated. Not that you can't forget in the future, we know, because we have minute independence. We can misuse it. But habit, we are creatures of habit. And we have a habit of sense gratification, which is why we kind of move in that direction. If nobody pushes us any other direction, if we're not in good association with devotees, if we're not hearing from the spiritual master, then whatever sangha comes into our 10 senses throughout the day, in the form of sound or sight or touch or smell or taste, then that's going to have an impact upon our consciousness. And it's going to influence pretty heavily our decisions. Sangat sanjayate kamaha. Very simple thing. Sangha doesn't just mean who you're associating with another person. It means anything that is entering your consciousness through your 10 organic senses. So we have to carefully monitor that, and habit is an important part of that. So if we get into the habit of devotional service, then we can elevate ourselves by the mind instead of degrading ourselves by the mind. That's called Vaidhi Bhakti. Breaking the habit of criminal activity. What is the criminal activity? Sense gratification. The attempt to compete with Bhagavan by either exploiting his assets or denying his or evading his authority. This is what we do. These two things are called bhoga tyaga, or we also call them karma and jnana. This is our habit. Anyway, we have further comments, so we'll move on. Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur is next. He says, Nanu yadi vidvana pi karma kuryat tarhi vidvada vidusho ko vishesha itya shankatayor vishesham darshayati prakateriti dvabhyam. It's exactly the same thing that we've already heard from Sridhar Swami. Prakatair gunaihi varyair indriyaihi sarvashaha sarva prakarina kriyamanani yani karmani tani aham eva karta karomiti. Avidvan manyate, the person who thinks this is not learned. He says the doubt may arise that if there's, how do you distinguish a person in knowledge from the ignorant person if they're both performing actions? So 2 verses explain this. The ignorant person thinks that he's the performer of all the actions performed completely by the material senses, which are the products of the gunas. It's actually a great inspiration to see how Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur has succinctly restated exactly all the points that were made by Sridhar Swami. It shows not only his fidelity to his predecessor Acharya, but also his very clear assimilation of what's being taught here. And he's not the only one. His disciple Baladev Vidyabhushan does the same thing. His commentary is too long to read, but I can give the translation. He says, although one should be tolerant of those persons absorbed in karma, the difference between the person in knowledge and the person in ignorance is expressed in 2 verses. He's telling us the same thing. But he's added a new dimension. What is that dimension? The first phrase. What does he say? Although one should be tolerant of persons who are absorbed in karma. Why does he say this? Anybody who's been listening closely. What does text number 26 say? Krishna says, although they're ignorant, you should not discourage persons who are absorbed in karma. So he's referring back to what Krishna just spoke in the previous text. We should tolerate persons who are not as advanced as us. Every teacher has to learn this quality, patience. You have to be very patient if you're going to successfully train another person up. So that takes a lot of tolerance. Sometimes a disciple, Prabhupada writes, or a student, may not really get it so easily. Or he understands theoretically, but he can't follow it. This is another thing. And a teacher has to be very tolerant. It's a good thing for us, isn't it? Where would we be if Srila Prabhupada was not this tolerant and patient with us? How much of what he's giving us in these books do we really get? And how much of that do we apply? Even what we can understand, how much of it do we actually apply? So, this is why Krishna mentioned that. Okay, so 2 verses express the difference between somebody who's acting in knowledge and somebody who's not. Srila Prabhupada opened his purport by telling us there's a world of difference between the person who is awake in Krishna consciousness and the person who is acting exclusively out of false ego. Baladev Vidyabhushan continues, the person bewildered by false ego thinks that he is the doer of activities. He also goes on to say, there are different kinds of activities. Some activities are prescribed and some activities are just worldly activities. What does he say in Sanskrit? Karmani, laukikani, vaidikani cha. There are activities like brushing your teeth, going to the market and buying sabzis, or feeding a cow. These are, or maybe not feeding a cow, but getting dressed. Ordinary things that we do every day. They're not governed by Shastra so much. It means to say that Shastra doesn't really regulate the details so much. But Vaidikanicha, there are activities that are explicitly enjoined in Shastra, such as rise before sunrise, bathe before dawn. If you bathe after dawn, it doesn't really purify you as much as if you bathe during the Brahma Muhurta. And going to Mangalarati and performing your prescribed duties, these are Vedic activities. In the modern society, practically speaking, everything is just lokic, worldly. Nobody cares anymore about Vedic activity, Shastra conjunctions. But what does Krishna say about this? Ya Shastra vidham utsrijya vartate kamakarataha na sasiddhim avapnoti na sukham na param gatim. If you reject what the Shastra enjoins, you have that minute independence, we've already discussed that, but you're not going to be happy. Sometimes people get divorced. Sometimes they have affairs. They come to me with their problems. I have to counsel them. They suffer so much. So it's always best to do what the Shastra enjoins, because Krishna is only looking for our own happiness. If you want to be happy, there's only one way to do it, and that is by blessings, by following Shastra conjunctions, by being pious. Otherwise, we all have to suffer so many sinful reactions. So Baladev Vidyabhushan is making this distinction, but he says in either case, it doesn't really matter from a spiritual perspective, because after all, these things are all impelled by the modes of material nature. We are conditioned souls. We have a choice to follow the Shastra. We have a choice to break the rules also. But either way, we're so thick with illusion that we're being impelled by these gunas, and we're thinking that we're making a choice. But actually, these things are all impelled by the Lord's byproducts of Maya. The body, the senses, the pranas that flow through the body and make it operate properly. Your body won't even operate properly if you have a disturbance in your life airs. This is Ayurveda. So, he says we should understand this, that the Jivatma with a body made of knowledge is and has a sense of I that is real. There is a real ego in our spiritual body. And in that sense, we are actually the doer, in the sense we're making a choice whether to serve Krishna or not. Once we make the choice not to serve Krishna, then we lose further choices. Everything from that point on is going to be impelled by the material energy. But we should qualify this by adding that we're making this choice at every moment. Shall I serve Krishna or not? Otherwise, we'd never be able to get out of this material world. So we become overcome with vasanas, impressions from enjoying material sense objects since time immemorial, that we've already heard. And through false ego, the product of Prakriti, we become bewildered, devoid of knowledge of the self. And we think that we are this material body. I'm young, I'm old, I'm an American, I'm Indian, I'm this or that, so many different things. And we identify like that. Then we think that the activities that are accomplished by the Lord through the material body, the senses, the life airs, are being done only by ourselves. There is some truth in that. The doership of the Atma is made possible by the body, senses, and life airs, and by the Paramatma, who is the activator of all things. The jiva is not the only factor. How do we know this? Here Krishna is telling us that the jiva who is bewildered, who's thinking that I'm doing things that are actually carried out by material nature. But we're not the only actor. How do we know this? From Bhagavad Gita. Think chapter 18. Anybody know the verse I'm thinking of? There's a specific verse. Adhishtanam tatha karta. Karanam cha prathak vidham. Vividhascha prathak cheshta devam chevatra panchamam. 5 factors of action. And Baladev Vidyabhushan, throughout his commentary, he emphasizes these. What are they? There's a place, adhishtanam, that you perform activities. And there's instruments that you work with, karanam, the senses. There's the doer, that is the spirit soul who is making a decision. Do I accept what is being presented to me by Maya, or do I reject it? This is what the spirit soul can do. And there is the activities itself. There are different kinds of actions in this world. He's already described. Some of them are enjoined by Shastra, some of them are enjoined by our minds. Cheshta, pratak cheshta. And finally, there's one ultimate factor, and what is that? Yeah, I should say who is that, not what is that. Daivam. Here it's stated Daivam. Elsewhere he names him particularly, Paramatma. So this is the idea. So Baladeva is quoting this verse. In this verse, Srila Prabhupada specifies adhishtanam, the locus of activity, the location. That refers to the body. And karta means the spirit soul, the person who is deciding to accept or reject what's presented to him. The instruments of action are the senses, and the different endeavors are there, and ultimately the super soul. Srila Prabhupada emphasizes the super soul. Then he points out, Shiridavang manobhiryat karma prarabhate naraha nyayam va viparitam va panchaite tasya hetavaha. Whatever right or wrong action a person performs by body, mind, or speech is created by these 5 factors. So the spirit soul, he's acting in a limited capacity. When we say that the activities are carried out by material nature, it doesn't mean that material nature alone is doing them, because these 5 factors are always there. But definitely this material nature is involved, at least in terms of supplying the ingredients of the karanam and the adhishtanam, 2 of those factors. So whatever right or wrong action a man performs by body, mind, or speech is caused by these 5 factors. Srila Prabhupada writes in his purport on that verse that right or wrong are very significant in this verse. We don't have much of a sense of right and wrong in this world. It's eroding tremendously every day, especially in foreign countries. India is still okay a little bit, but you go to a place like Bangalore, Mumbai, then you'll see. Right work is work done in terms of prescribed directions in the scriptures. How many times do we have to say it? And wrong work is work done against the principles of scriptural injunctions. This is the difference between right and wrong. But in either case, whatever is done requires these 5 factors. This is the point. And then finally he says, therefore one who thinks himself the only doer, not considering the 5 factors, is certainly not very intelligent. All right, these are the verses that Baladeva Vidabhushan has quoted in his commentary. Now he resumes his commentary by quoting another verse, chapter 13, text number 21. Karya karana kartritve hetuhu prakritiruchyate. Purusha sukha dukkhanam bhoktritve heturuchyate. This is another famous verse. Nature is said to be the cause of all material causes and effects, whereas the living entity is the cause of the various sufferings and enjoyments. That's pretty abstract. What does it mean? Whatever activities and results you are involved with, those are all being facilitated by material nature, which is why Krishna can say in tonight's verse that these activities are being carried out by nature alone. Material nature supplies all the gross ingredients and the direction and the intelligence behind everything. It's all supplied by material nature. But depending on what choices we make, and that's really pretty much all we can do is choose what to accept and what to reject. Depending on our choices, we cause ourselves various sufferings and enjoyments. How so? As we've described. If you do something pious means you follow the injunctions of the Shastra, then you enjoy in the future. That's the natural consequence of following Shastra Vidhi and engaging in piety. You become happy. And on the other hand, if you defiantly ignore the Shastra or neglect the Shastra or deny the Shastra and do sinful things instead, because the definition of sin is to do that, then what happens? You suffer as a result. And when you suffer, you become unhappy. So it's axiomatic. Piety means happiness. Impiety means misery. So nature causes all this activity, facilitates all this activity, but we cause whether we suffer or whether we enjoy. That's what we do. This is our minute independence. Okay, so Srila Prabhupada has given us a purport there to that verse also, 13.21. The different manifestations of bodies and senses among the living entities are due to material nature. This is the point we're making. His material happiness and distress are due to his body, not to himself, as he is. In his original state, there's no doubt of enjoyment. Therefore, that's his real state. It might be more clear to state that the body is the effect of the senses. The senses are instruments for gratifying desire. Now, the sum total, the body and the instrumental senses, are offered by material nature. And as will be clear in the next verse, the living entity is blessed or damned with the circumstances according to his past desire and activity. Once placed in some particular kind of body, he comes under the control of nature, because the body, being matter, acts in accordance with the laws of nature. At that time, the living entity has no power to change that law. Suppose an entity is put into the body of a dog. What happens? Prabhupada said, when you're sinful, death means you go to sleep and you wake up as a dog. You suddenly have a snout. You've got no more hands, but you've got 4 legs, but you can't really do anything anymore. The other day I was feeding the cow, Saraswati, MBT cow. And I was just meditating on this, that, how difficult it must be when your only instrument of action is her face. She can walk around no problem, 4 legs, but she can't really pick things up, and she's got a mouth to work with, and that's it. This is what happens when you're incarcerated in an animal body. Tiryak Janma, it's called. Tiryak Yoni. Sideways body. animals. And what to speak of quadrupeds? Well, what happens if you're born as a fish? You can't even breathe air anymore. Or if you're a germ, some people are reincarnated as SARS-CoV-2 viruses. That's a pretty sinful birth, isn't it? Cause all sorts of adibautic miseries for other people. Think of the options. There are 8,400,000 of them, and what we're doing now is determining which one we're going to get next. People don't think like this. People don't think at all. Why? Because all their activities are being carried out on autopilot, impelled by the modes of material nature. There's no need to think, isn't it? All you have to do is exist, and your senses will tell you, I'm hungry, so you start acting. The genital wants gratification, you chase after the opposite sex. The mind wants some sort of, everything that we do is impelled by these modes of material nature. Let's all turn off our cell phones, please. This is like the third or fourth time it's happened. So, anyway, the point being made here, and then Prabhupada gives another example in case we can't figure it out from dog example. He mentions hogs, and then he says, you may even be a demigod as well. Do you think the demigods have it any better? We're reading if we're reading the Bhagavatam, we're reading that even if you are Brihaspati, somebody will still run off with your wife. Is it not a fact? Who ran off with Brihaspati's wife? Soma. And who was the result of their illicit sex? Buddha, another planet. Even amongst the controllers of living beings, like these great planets, Surya is another example, very powerful. Yat chakshuresha savita sagala grahanam raja samasta suramurti rashesha teja, ashesha teja, infinite potency he has. And he's the eye of the world. Nothing escapes the attention of Surya. But he has dysfunctional relationships with his own children. Who is it? Shani Dev. Shani and Surya, if you know astrology, they don't get along at all. They don't even talk to one another. Shani and... sorry? Yamaraj, Tapti, and Shani. These are the... Yes. 4... As far as I count, there are 4 kids. There may be more than that because demigods sometimes also have colorful lives, but this is the point that we're making. So, Abrahma Bhuvana Loka Punaravartin Orjuna, even if you go up to Brahma Loka, don't think your troubles are solved just because you've got 4 heads or 64 heads or how many heads. It just complicates your situation. But the essential experience of material existence doesn't change anywhere. You're still in the same category. Karthaham iti manyate. Even though you're being pushed and pulled by the modes at every step. And you can hardly make your own choices, although you think you do. This is the whole point. All right, so the Prabhupada says, this is the law of nature. In all circumstances, the super soul is there with us. Dva suparnas sayuja sakhayaha. This is in the Mundaka Upanishad. He's sitting on the same branch. We're like passionate birds pecking at the fruits. He's just watching. Upadrashtanu mantacha. It's a good thing. He's there with us. That's love. That's real love. Even he throws us into material existence, but he never abandons us. He's always watching us, like a loving parent. So, anyway, these are the 5 factors of action, and Baladev Vidyabhushan here is making the point that the living entity can be said to be a karta in some limited sense, because he's got limited independence, minute independence, but he's not by any means completely independent. Srila Prabhupada is only making a few very basic points in his purport. Number one, he says, although they may look exactly alike, there is a wide gulf of difference between the devotees and the non-devotees. This we should understand. Why should we understand this? Because if you don't see this difference, then you will casually be influenced in the wrong way by the wrong people. That's one thing. And on the other side of the same coin, you will also casually mistreat those that you should be very respectful and cautious with. And you will maybe not follow their advice or their instructions when it could really benefit you. So this is the importance of sambandha jnana. Sambandha jnana means the preliminary knowledge of our relationship with the Lord and with his energies. Relationship, sambandha, means relationship. It is impossible to chant the holy name of Krishna without offense if we do not cultivate sambandha jnana. And verses like today's verse are explaining this sambandha jnana. Who do I associate with? Who do I not associate with? This is the first point. I mean, to say that this is the ramification of the first thing that Srila Prabhupada says for us in his purport. There's a big difference. How does Srimad Bhagavatam put it? Very bluntly, and I mean almost I want to say, so radical. Srimad Bhagavatam says, the devotees pure devotees have all good qualities, and the non-devotees have no good qualities. Does that not sound like total fanaticism and sectarian? Just sounds so terrible. But actually there's science to it. There is a science to the method to the madness, as Shakespeare said. So this is the first point that we get from Prabhupada's purport. Another thing he says to really fill that out or to explain, he says, pure devotees are aware of the real situation. They know things as they are. But the non-devotees, they're living in a bewildering illusion. This is the point. Ahankara vimudhatma. Vimudha. He's an atma, but he's vimudha. He's become a, what do I want to say? Supreme ass. Vishesh mudha. He's become especially an ass. Why? Ahankarena. By false ego. By misidentifying with something temporary, he's entered this bewildering illusion. This is the fundamental distinction between the awakened devotees and the non-devotees. And the last point that Prabhupada makes in his purport, at least the last point that struck me, is that it's possible that you can forget this reality through false identification. False identification means false ego. We have to be careful. And as we hear in the 5th canto, we never trust your mind. Never trust it. Because it can really take you for a ride. There's a lot in this verse. I mean, we could speak on this verse for days, really. It's so important. Simply put, very easy Sanskrit also, this verse. But the real depth, the importance of what Krishna is saying is so and the ramifications of what he's saying are so massive that after several decades of Krishna consciousness, we begin to realize how important this verse actually is. Srila Prabhupada's purport, as usual, he's embodying the spirit and the teachings also, his predecessors, as we've heard since Sridhar Swami and then Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur and Baladev Vidyabhushan. Srila Prabhupada also reflects what they have given us when he says, 2 persons, one in Krishna consciousness and the other in material consciousness, working on the same level may appear to be working on the same platform, but there is a wide gulf of difference in their respective positions. He's not inventing this out of whole cloth. He's getting this from at least 3 of his predecessor acharyas. Similarly, he explains, The person in false ego takes all credit for doing everything independently, and we've already discussed that from different angles of vision. Madhvacharya has his view of things. Ramanujacharya has given his input. The others have given. But this is a symptom of his nescience. If you think you're independent, it's confirmed. You're a vimudhatma. And finally, due to his long misuse of the senses and sense gratification, he's factually bewildered by the false ego, which makes him forget his eternal relationship with Krishna. As long as we are embracing a false identification, we will not be able to reestablish that relationship. There's much more that can be said about this, but I'm going to stop here because it's almost 7 o'clock. If anybody has any questions or comments, we can discuss further. Yes, Prabhuji.
Between the soul and the false ego. And the soul represents, scriptures, love for Krishna, following instructions of Krishna. And the false ego is psychophysical nature coming from previous lives, which is forcing us in terms of inclinations, or the mind trying to take us away from the soul's objective.
Take the microphone about 1 inch away from your mouth, and it will be easier for me to hear you.
Sorry.
Okay.
So the false ego is, represents the mind also.
Yes.
Taking us away, and of psychophysical nature.
Yeah, the false ego identifies with the mind.
Yeah. So this battle is going on, and we should always go for the soul's advice, which is follow the scriptures, follow Krishna's instructions.
Yeah, what we hear in the 5th canto is that we have to sharpen the sword of knowledge by the mercy of the spiritual master. And we know from the 15th chapter of Bhagavad Gita that we just have to slash all this great tree, banyan tree of material existence that we've surrounded ourselves with, and gradually cut ourselves free of the illusion. Yeah, it's a battle. It's a real battle. And so we have to take strength. You cannot fight unless you've got a team supporting you. And for the devotees, that is the association of other devotees. Visheshkar, devotees who are more advanced than ourselves. We heard the other day this, we have to associate with devotees who are like us enough that we can relate, but ahead of us in terms of the depth of their faith. That's the winning combination. Both those qualifications have to be there, and that will help us. Satsanga. Satsanga taraho e bhava sindhure, Govindadas Kaviraj says. In this, from good association, we can win this battle. But don't think it's going to be an easy thing. We're trying to escape from the Durga. Durga means the prison. Durgama gacchati iti Durga. So, if you're trying to make a prison break, immediately all the resources of the prison are going to be focused upon you. All the spotlights, all the machine guns, all the guards, all the dogs, they're all coming straight at you. This is what to expect when we take to Krishna consciousness. I hope I'm not scaring anyone away. But we have to be realistic. It is a fight. And when we start fighting, then we realize that it's a fight. Before that, it's just, chant and be happy. It's true, but there's some work to do because we're infected very deeply. And that has to be rooted out. It's like cancer. You have to pull it all out, otherwise it's gonna spread and take over. But Srila Prabhupada, as he always says, if we surround ourselves, the closer we get to Krishna and the association of Krishna and his devotees, then that much sooner we get free. That much easier the process gets. That much faster we go back to Godhead. It's up to us. Tivrena bhakti yogena. Okay?
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Anything else? Okay, so we'll stop here. Thank you very much. All glories to Srila Prabhupada.